So you've decided to change your violin strings and you don't know where to start. Let's talk about how to find the perfect violin strings for your instrument. Choosing the right violin strings for your instrument can affect not only how they sound, but also how they feel under the bow and the fingers. The issue is that not every set of strings suits every instrument. So you might have to do some experimentation to find the right set of strings to maximize the sound and tone quality from your violin. There are three main types of strings on the market. Number one is gut strings. Gut strings have a very warm and complex sound and have a slower response underneath the bow. They're also very affected by humidity and are often used by Baroque and classical players. The next type of strings are synthetic cool strings. These are probably the most common type of strings used by professional players using a modern violin setup today. In terms of tuning, they're a bit more stable than gut strings and have a nice blend between brightness, directness, and complexity. Finally, we have steel cool strings, which are very bright and very strong, but perhaps might lack some complexity that synthetic and gut strings have. Each set of strings has its own character. Strings can be more broad or more direct. They can be more warm or more brilliant. Depending on your instrument, you should choose some strings to complement your violin. My violin, for example, is very rich and broad with tone, and so I've chosen some strings with a little bit more brightness and directness to counterbalance that to get a nice blend. For an overly bright violin, you could choose some strings that are more complex and rich, and for an overly dark violin, you might want to choose some strings that are more bright and focused. On the screen you can see a string chart, and placed in that grid are different popular sets of strings depending on their characteristic. You can use this string chart to choose which strings to buy and experiment with next. If you have a very broad and rich sounding violin and you put some very complex strings, it might result in the violin sounding a bit lifeless. If you have an overly bright violin and you put bright, focused strings on, it may result in the violin sounding tinny and shrill and lacking in complexity and tone. Just because a set of strings is expensive doesn't necessarily mean they're better. And just because someone else you know uses a particular set of strings on their violin doesn't mean it will suit your violin either. Strings also come in different types of tension, whether that be low, medium or high. Sometimes high tension strings just don't work well with certain instruments and can restrict the amount of breathing room that your violin has. If you want to experiment with different tensions of strings, it's always worth going to see a luthier and discussing your instrument setup and what type of tension of strings might be suitable. When testing violin strings, let them settle down on your instrument for 7 to 10 days of playing. Make some recordings or either go and play to a luthier, your teacher and friends to really see if you can find whether those strings have improved the sound and feel of your violin or not.